right, now I want to pass it off to Karina from Casey.
Thank you so much, Polani, and thank you to the Partnership for America's Children for co-hosting this webinar with us today. Hello, everyone, and again, welcome. My name is Karina Jimenez Lewis, and I'm a Senior Policy Associate with the Kids Count team here at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. Today, I'm delighted to share information with you about the Foundation Peer-to-Peer Match program and to introduce 4 amazing child advocates who will tell us about their experience with the program. So first, a word about the Peer Match program. As you know, the Kids Count Network is rich with child advocates who possess a wealth of expertise and knowledge about policy advocacy, data, communications, and strategic leadership anchored in race, equity, and inclusion principles that can help advance the well-being of children. The Foundation is pleased to support technical assistance in the form of peer matches and mentoring that can provide Kids Count organizations with the opportunity to learn from fellow network members or gain hands-on experience to apply to specific projects or to adapt to a new role. Today, we have 2 terrific examples of experiential learning, one applied to a specific project and one of adapting to a new organizational role. First, we will hear from Beth Nolan and Frances Deviney and their collaboration on a major Kids Count data product timed to voter and candidate education efforts. Beth is the Kids Count Director at Voices for Virginia's Children, and she has many years of experience in policy analysis, outreach, project management, and advocacy for child policy. Previously, Beth oversaw research, outreach, communications, and grassroots activities to support policy work in Vermont. For her project, Beth partnered with Dr. Frances Deviney, a developmental psychologist, advocate, and self-professed data nerd at the Center for Public Policy Priorities in Texas. Frances believes in daring Texas to be the best for every Texan by expanding opportunity and justice through fact-based policy change. Frances serves as CPP's Associate Director and oversees all of the Center's database advocacy projects, including Kids Count. Next, we will hear from Tara Manthey and Amanda Hoelzeman. Tara is celebrating her 10th year in the Kids Count Network. She's the Communications and Outreach Director for the Colorado Children's Campaign, and she previously served as Communications Director for Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families. Tara is currently chair of the Communications Working Group of the Kids Count Steering Committee as well. Tara served as a peer mentor to Amanda Hoelzeman, who joined Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families as its Communications Director in January of 2016. Prior to entering the child advocacy world, Amanda worked for a decade in publishing, serving as editor of Little Rock Soiree magazine and several other publications. Welcome all. We are in for a treat this afternoon with these 4 advocates. And with that, let me hand it off to Beth and Frances. Beth.
Great, thank you, Karina. So there's a number of things that we're going to just touch on today, and I wanted to say at the beginning of the webinar that there's a lot more that we could probably talk about during this time, so if you would like to reach out to me, and I'm sure to Frances, please do so. Our contact information is on here. I thought it was important to first start with the context of Virginia because that kind of sets the stage for the product and the peer match and what we did. It was a big data product for us in 2017, and we were one of 2 states in 2017, New Jersey being the other, with a gubernatorial race. Our entire House of Delegates was up for re-election, and we were hearing a lot in the media about Virginia being a thermometer for how the rest of the country will actually move politically. So we knew that the data product had to be connected to what was happening around the elections in Virginia. The peer match opportunity kind of slowly came into place. I heard a little bit about it, and then I sought out Karina and asked her a little bit more to figure out would it be a potential good opportunity for me. Now, the reason for a peer match and the reason I really wanted to look a little bit more into it was because I had stepped into this Kids Count role in, oh goodness, it was last August, and I've actually been part of Voices organizations when I worked for Voices for Vermont Children for some time, but in a different role and in a policy role. And so this was the first time I'd actually been in a Kids Count role, and it was my first big data product. And I thought there were certainly some things I knew, but lots more I didn't know. And having the opportunity to connect with and work with somebody who has done a lot of work and been a Kids Count director for a long time seemed like a really good start to making a product that was worthwhile. So that's really why I thought jumping into something like a Peer Match would be beneficial for me, but also for our organization. So there's several things.
Can I make a quick comment, Beth?
Yeah.
This is Frances Deviney, the Peer Match partner. And I just wanted to throw in, too, that one of the reasons that we agreed to do the Peer Match was because we'd had an experience with a prior organization, and we knew how much we learned from the experience as well. It wasn't unilateral. There was definitely a lot, through just talking through our own experience, helped us even process the kinds of steps we were taking and why, and to think through it more deliberately. And two, they were doing a lot of things in Virginia that we hadn't done that we were excited to learn about. So it's not, I want to encourage people who are being approached to be peer mentors to think about it not just as a one-way exchange, but there's really a wonderful two-way exchange that happens.
Yeah, thank you. And you'll hear, we're just going to go kind of back and forth. So Frances will come in and out as we both talk and present today, just if you're curious what was going on there. So one of the things that was really important as we set out to do this Peer Match was to come up with some sets of points of contact as well as support, defining what that support would look like, because there's lots of ways you can support one another, and it could probably get a little crazy for everybody unless there's some defined scope of support. And so what I knew I needed ended up being what we decided to define, and that was things like, what do our graphics look like? Are we using the right type of language as we talk about these issues? And of particular importance to me was, are we using the right type of language when we're trying to integrate some of the disaggregated data by race and ethnicity? I remember, and I just actually told Frances this not long ago, but I remember when we were at before this past year's conference, I heard Frances present. And one of the things that really, really stuck with me was this idea that she discussed called editorial headlining. And basically, what I understood that to mean was, you don't just have a headline on a graph that tells you what the graph shows, but you have a headline on that graph that tells people what you want them to get out of looking at that particular graph. And that really piqued my interest and was something I wanted support on in particular when we were doing this project. Also, there's a lot of different indicators that we use as Kids Count organizations, and so having some input on thinking through thoughtfully what indicators are important and what indicators are important, but not necessarily for this particular project. And then communications was a big part of it as well. How do we, once we have this product, communicate out the product? So this was our sort of big picture scope of the things that we wanted the Peer Match to focus in on. It also seemed important to set various points of contact. So although Frances and I spoke via email and on the phone outside of these particular times, we at least had some expectations of when big points would come throughout the time we were working together. And I think that was important for me because I needed to make sure that I was hitting those points and reaching out when it was necessary. And I know for Frances, it was probably also important that she knew when I was going to be coming to her, and it wasn't, necessarily every minute of every day, although some days I wanted to do that. So.
Well, and I have to say it was really helpful, and I appreciate it. And I would encourage anyone who's looking to do a Peer Match to do something similar, where you develop that scope of work together. Because I, as all other child advocates are, am incredibly busy doing 40 different things, and to know what the boundaries were and to help to set them too, because you could very easily, we could spend a lot of time talking through the nuances of, graphics and stuff. And so I found it very helpful that Beth initiated that contact and then allowed me to kind of help define it as well. So I could kind of say when I would be available and when I wouldn't be available based on my own kind of requirements and deadlines.
So one point that I really wanted to drive home in terms of sort of the lessons learned on the Pier Match part was that we met in person, and to be honest, I was a little reluctant to do so originally just because I'm in Virginia and Frances is in Texas, and as Frances mentioned, everybody is really busy, and taking, however many days out of your work life to travel can be a lot. But when I initially said, I think we could do this on the phone and we'll figure it out going back and forth that way, Karina and the Casey Foundation really encouraged us to consider an in-person meeting. And I said, okay, sure, we can do that, somewhat reluctantly so. And I am so glad that Karina pushed back, because I really think it set the tone for our ability to work with one another. It allowed us some face-to-face interaction and just a greater depth and breadth of topic and discussion while we were there. So I would encourage anybody who's considering a peer match, even though it really is difficult to step outside for a day or two, to go and meet in person, because it made all the difference in not only the peer match, but in our product as well that came from it.
Well, and I would say for us, it was really valuable to have Beth here, not just because, there's the social aspect of it too. Once you get to know a person kind of face-to-face, as you know with any relationship you build, it just changes the dynamic of the relationship tremendously, hopefully for the better. It was the better for us. But also, and I don't want this to scare off any people who are considering being peer matches, but it was very positive for us because Beth got to meet other folks on my team, whereas if we were just doing it over the phone, it probably wouldn't have been as dynamic an exchange. Mm-hmm. But so we had her meet with our outreach person, and we had her meet with our communications director, and we had a much more dynamic exchange with the different roles on the staff that could help inform in ways that maybe I didn't know in such great detail. So that was really positive, and I think it was easier because she was here than if we've been trying to negotiate over the phone.
Agreed. And one of the things that I think really set the tone for the work and how I did my work internally within my organization once we were back and doing all of the pieces of the product was I was really pushed during that meeting, and it wasn't necessarily an agenda item, but through conversation came up to talk about why. Why are you talking about this indicator? Why are you showing this particular image this way? Every step of the way you need to ask yourself, why, and does it meet your goal? Do you get to your end goal by showing every piece of what's on this piece of paper? And I'm not sure I would have gotten that in a phone conversation, but that really set the tone, like I said, for the product. So just a plug.
I can be super annoying that way. So if anybody would like somebody to be super annoying that way, you can actually call me anytime. I can be super annoying.
Yeah, it was all good. It was all good. So the actual data product was two parts. The first part was a 12-page report that focused in on economic success, economic security for children, and how it relates to their future and to Virginia's economic prosperity as a state. And the second part was a series of 8 one-pagers, and on the front of the one-pager was a series of different data points that we thought were important to have a conversation about, and on the back of it were questions for candidates. So they were questions that we had crafted that anybody could use in a variety of settings to ask candidates questions on topics that mattered to children. It was and looks, like any product you put together, pretty and so nicely put together at the end, but that is not necessarily the process. And so the process, while it seems pretty when you look at the end of it, really was more of a curvy road than a straight one. And we had to think through a lot of different pieces to decide what the product would look like, what the topics covered would be. And just to give an example, the 12-page product the report part of it, I had originally said, oh, we're going to cover all these topics. I mean, one from every domain of child well-being. And I literally sat down and started writing. And once I started writing and I got to not even through the first domain on economic well-being, I realized that it's not possible. And because of the audience and the context of the election in Virginia, we made a decision to narrow in what we were talking about on that report, because we sure could have done a 30-page report. But the question is, who in that quick, fast political climate is going to read all of that information? And so we decided to focus just in on one area, economic well-being, and shorten it to, even though 12 pages is still quite long, but shorten it to 12 pages. One of the questions I've been talking with people around the country about this product that I've received a lot is, how did you come to the decision on the topics that you ended up presenting for your one-pagers? And it was a series of different points that led us to the topics that we did, but what really came out of deciding those topics was, it was a combination of the issues that we know we're experts on in this organization with issues we knew were going to get brought up because it's an election year, and probably wouldn't have had a child-focused lens on it if we didn't present one. And a really good example of that was the opioid epidemic. Oftentimes, that focuses on what's happening with the adults in that system and with that epidemic. And we wanted to make sure that, since that was going to be a point of conversation in the election, that we reminded people that children are part of that too, and how does it impact children. So that's kind of how we ended up, in a clean way, coming to the 8 topics that we decided to focus in on for the data product. So there's a lot that went into the behind the scenes, and it took a lot of time to think through, but there's a couple of things that I wanted to make sure in our short time that we touched on. And one of those is that the accompanying materials matter. So we created this 2-part product, but we knew that if we just had it and printed some copies of it, people would still not necessarily know how to use it. And so we set out to create a bunch of things to go along with it, so that it was very clear how people could use the resource. We did a webinar, and we recorded it and had a live one on how to actually use it. What do you do with this information? It was geared towards our partners, so it has a nonprofit lens on it for organizational use of it. We did a couple of different media campaigns. One was actually saying, hey, we've got this really great resource, make sure you use it. And then the second iteration of it was now that we have this really great resource, here are all the pieces within that resource that you need to know about. And we actually provided the graphics with sample text, much like the Casey Foundation does when we have our big data product each year. And so that was important for us, and we added a hashtag to that so that we could kind of track it and make it, kind of a thing to have people use. And then everywhere we went, and presentations we were already doing, and then we created new presentations, we talked about this and presented on the election guide. The other thing that was really important in terms of its use and getting other people to use it was that we put everything in one easy location on our website. We had a drop down that said elections, and everything lived off of this elections website page. So you could find all the information, and you didn't have to kind of search around to figure out where the report was versus where the social media toolkit was, etc. So just making it easy for people to use was important, and I think critical in our success of how many partners ended up using the toolkit. So what's really critical, I think, is that nothing was done in a vacuum on this particular project, and every piece along the way had everything to do with the success of the outcome. The peer match support was incredibly important throughout it, but in particular in really setting the tone and in setting the framework for the product itself. I probably could talk quite a bit about how critical it was that the policy team was engaged on this data product from the very beginning. I know that oftentimes everybody is really busy, especially the policy team. And so, it's easy enough for the Kids Count director or whomever is doing Kids Count to kind of keep going along doing their thing, and the policy people to keep going along and doing their thing. But we really made an intentional effort to figure out at the very beginning, how are we going to make a product that we know everybody is going to use as a part of this organization? How is each policy person going to be able to use this in their work? That's really the goal. And so even though at times I am certain I drove the policy team crazy with how often I was bothering them, everybody, when we debriefed at the end, said we would not have the product that we ended up having with the success we feel we had with it if we hadn't started with the policy team and Kids Count really sitting together and going every step of the way on every decision as a team. So that was really important for our work and for the guide. We also reached outside of our organization for input. We all work with partners, and engaging our partners also from the beginning was critical. They gave us a lot of input on what indicators we were picking, if it spoke to their audience and to people, and what questions we were asking, if it made sense to them as well. And that really helped us not only craft the product, but also helped us be able to then go back to those partners and say, now you use this product. And it gave them a lot of buy-in. They felt like they were part of it, and that made them more likely to use it. So that was also important. The last thing I want to mention on some of the highlights in terms of what made it successful was our nonpartisan approach. Many of us are nonpartisan organizations. We intentionally, if you go through the election guide, will notice that we did not put any policy recommendations into the data product. And that was because we wanted to make sure that this was an educational tool for voters and legislators and people who are running for office. And if we also put in the policy recommendations, it might look like we're trying to guide towards a particular viewpoint, and that would be counterproductive to wanting to educate voters. We did work with Alliance for Justice on making sure all of our language was nonpartisan and met the criteria for a nonpartisan nonprofit organization doing electoral advocacy. So I would suggest that anybody who's considering something like this, work for Alliance for Justice, work with them to figure out what is and is not appropriate. And I know that they're a TA for Casey, and I believe that you can just reach out to them directly, and they're happy to help. So.
And if anybody else is looking to do a product like this, certainly talk to Beth, but we could also be supports for each other, because we liked the product that Beth and her team came up with so much that we are going to replicate it in Texas, and we've never done a product like this before. So we're excited, and that's another example of how I learned so much from her as well as vice versa. So.
Yay. And the last thing I'll say is just that on this piece is that the election guide really did become a basis for all of our work. And I mean that by saying we repurposed that over and over again. We spent so much time thinking through every word that was on all of those pieces of the product that we wanted to make sure we used it, and we used it well and a lot. And so we used it when we crafted our questions for our candidate forum, our gubernatorial candidate forum that we put together. We used it when we crafted questions for the candidate questionnaires that we sent out to everybody running for office. And we are actually going to use it again, slightly repurpose it for the legislative session for 2018, because our target audience is different. Our target audience before was mostly voters, organizations, and partners, whereas Now we're going to shift it a little bit to make the target audience legislators. And we're going to take out those questions for candidates, and we're going to replace them with talking points that we can use and our partners can use when we speak with legislators. So repurpose, repurpose, repurpose. And so far, we're really liking that approach. The other question I got a lot as I've been talking to people is, what was your timeline for this? And the timeline for this was 2.5 months. That was not necessarily intentional, but the reality of our work and the reality of the timing of our legislative session, which is January through the end of February or mid-March, depending on the year, made it so that if we were really going to have the policy team 100% in this from the beginning, they had to be freed up from their legislative session because we have such short, intense sessions in Virginia. And so we waited until that was over to really start the project. However, we knew we had to have this product in place by the time the primaries happened if we were going to use it for the election. And that kind of pushed us into that 2.5-month time period. It worked. It was crazy. It's pretty much all I did. But certainly if you are able to build more time into it, it doesn't hurt to have more time to do it. Frances, is there anything else that you wanted to add in before questions? Because that's really kind of the next.
Nothing other than it was an extremely positive experience for us, and I would highly recommend folks taking advantage of this opportunity that Casey sets up.
Agreed. So I guess we open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions on this part, our work, or the peer match or anything.
You were that good, Beth.
Like, this is always the fun part, waiting for the question. I'll just say one last time that there's a lot more that went into it than we're probably able to explain in a 20-minute time period. And so if you think of things later, or if you would like to have a more detailed conversation about some of the logistics that went into either the peer match or into that data product itself, please do feel free to reach out. And I do know there will be copies of the slides available after the recording and after the webinar is completed. So I'm not quite sure who's navigating the questions, but I can see them, so I guess I will answer. Were we done? Someone asked, were we done collecting the data by April as well? Oh, yes. So I'm going to just go back to that timeline here for a second. The data, we hadn't determined what the indicators were going to be that we were going to use in the data product, but I had made an effort to make sure all of the data that we do track was the most relevant up-to-date data, so that when it was time to decide which indicators we were going to choose, we just were able to pick them rather than have to pause to go collect the data at that point. All right.
So this is Karina, and we have another question for you, Beth, and that is, were you done collecting data by April as well?
Oh, yeah. So, yes, we collected all that data prior to April, and then we were ready to go with which indicators we picked once we picked them.
Great, great. So we will go ahead and ask Tara and Amanda to join, but if there are any other questions regarding this session, this segment of the presentation, you can all feel free to queue those questions up, and we will try and have those answered at the end of the presentation. So thank you, Beth and Frances, for sharing with everyone what you've learned through this process. Now I have the honor of handing it off to Tara and Amanda. Tara.
Thank you so much. And I was going to get right off this call and make my peer-to-peer match request to Beth for our advocacy election guide in 2018, as we have a gubernatorial election coming. So stay tuned. This is Tara Manthey. I'm the Communications and Outreach Director for the Children's Campaign here in Colorado. And Amanda and I had a much more longer-term match that was structured a little bit differently because Amanda was new to her role and I had previously had that role. So we doubt that situation happens that often in the network. So we're going to try and give as much of the structure and advice that could apply to other situations where you're onboarding a new person and want to connect that person, especially connect that person to another person with experience, especially in our organizations. When you have someone in communications or development or outreach, there's often not another person in the organization that can mentor with that expertise. And even in some small states, there's not many other organizations that are doing policy advocacy at the level of, say, Arkansas Advocates is. And so it's really great to hopscotch to another state and find someone with the exact same job and the exact same skills and sometimes the same issues to be able to be a mentor. And from the perspective of mine, I've really enjoyed being a mentor. You really learn exactly what you know when you begin to try to teach someone else to do that. So it's really fulfilling, and I also got to go back and visit Little Rock and see some of my old friends there. And I'm going to ask Amanda to kind of outline the structure of how we set it up, and from the perspective of hers, how that was beneficial to her as coming on new, and then and how it was. We were careful not to load too much on at the beginning, but just have some early check-ins, and then build in a lot more of the more intensive training later as she was caught up to speed.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Tara. This is Amanda. I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit more about this. As we mentioned in the intro, when I came to Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families as Communications Director, I had just left a 10-year career in publishing. I had worked with nonprofits as a journalist, but I had never worked for one, and I was completely new to child advocacy work. But as you all know, our work is very urgent, and so when I got here, it was hit the ground running. But almost immediately, probably the first week I was hired, my executive director told me that I would be matching with Tara to kind of bring me up to speed, and she had this job in the past. So in my case, the match really helped bring me up to speed as to how to be a more effective communicator in the arena of child advocacy. And additionally, the partnership has given me a long-term mentor that I can still call on with questions and issues that arise. Any staff member in any role inevitably runs into issues or projects that they need help with or feedback on, and it's not something you want to take to your executive director, or not something you should take to your executive director. And having that sounding board that is outside of the organization, but someone who can provide you with valuable ideas and feedback is just amazing to have. It really takes the pressure out of the situation. I feel like I can go to Tara with honest questions and not feel silly or like this is something I should already know or something I should have the answer on. This type of work can be a little intimidating for people who are just jumping in. And so having this type of peer mentorship can really help ease some of that tension. And in our case, the match was really, it benefited the organization as a whole. I mean, obviously it brought me up to speed, and that was great for AACF. But in addition to that, Tara I'll kind of reiterate some of Beth's comments that I think it's incredibly important that you're able to bring the mentor to your organization. Tara spent 2 days here in Arkansas and did one-on-one training with me for 1 day, and then the next day she worked on, with our entire staff on a framing discussion on race, equity, and inclusion, and that was incredibly helpful for everyone here. They were all really hungry for that information, and so it helped them understand some of the basic principles, and it also helped bolster some of the communications work on racial equity that I am continuing with staff. In addition, Tara was able to share some of the tools in person that she had used before in her work, including a board dashboard that we have tweaked a little bit to use with our board. And we also worked on messaging, message boxes, style guides, just a variety of things. I continue actually to ask for Tara's help and feedback on everything from just basic time management skills and data tracking methods for this particular role to how to successfully launch, different Kids Count projects. And when we started our peer-to-peer mentorship, it was actually a unique time for Arkansas Advocates because we were about to enter our 40th year. And so I was trying to pull off a very detailed 40th anniversary communications plan with tons of moving parts. And so having that mentorship from Tara at that time was really valuable. She was able to give me feedback and advice, and we could talk about ways she had done certain things before, and it was just incredibly helpful. As far as logistics go, I will say that we, since ours was a longer-term mentorship, we did monthly calls for I think it was 6 months, and Tara, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
It was about 6 months, and so that worked really well to have the monthly calls because that allowed me enough time to kind of develop a list of things I wanted to ask her during our next call, and I just kept a running list in my Google Drive of things I wanted to talk to her about. But again, I agree with Beth that the site visit was really the most beneficial piece of our kind of the way we structured it because Tara, like I said, she spent 2 days here. We had been talking on the phone for months, so we were finally able to actually meet. And she was able to work with the staff and just reiterate a lot of the things that she and I had talked about. And it was just really nice to have her here and to work one-on-one together. And we, of course, my executive director here had kind of developed a list of things that he wanted us to work on specifically. And then we created an agenda for when she would be here so that we used our time, the short amount of time that we had, the best way that we could. And I'll just say, even though our mentorship is technically, our peer-to-peer match is technically over, we still have an ongoing relationship. Though we no longer have the monthly calls, I continue to reach out to her fairly regularly with different things I need help on or advice on. We actually spoke last week about some social media issues we were having here, and she's always available to help. So the peer match is, it's very helpful to fulfill immediate needs, but it's also, it's a long-term friendship. You always have someone that you can call on when you need advice in your particular role.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. And I think, like I mentioned, like Frances mentioned also, I learned a lot as well, or remember, just it brings you back to kind of like why you originally went into this work. And like right now I'm working on a lot of other more strategic things, and so working on communications like refocuses me and makes me think about that a little bit more. So it's always fun and interesting conversations, and I really enjoyed it. And I think one point we kind of the way it became so successful is because our personal lives were so similar. We both came from journalism and into nonprofit advocacy. We both became new mothers in our role at Arkansas Advocates or shortly thereafter. So there was a lot of things that were aligned as well. And so for people looking for peer matches for new staff, I would encourage you to think about other alignments like that, just to help bolster that relationship, or really finding similarly situated organizations. So both of our organizations are of a similar size and work on multi-issues, and so it really was, of the advice I had to give was she was able to implement. So it was a lot of things were serendipitous, but I think there's so many great people in the network that if you're looking for someone to connect with, the folks at Casey could help kind of think through what would be the best organizations that have the skills that you're looking to build.
This is Kadena. Thank you, Amanda and Tara. That's an amazing example of a great partnership over the mentor program. Now is a good time to share your questions for either of our presenters to answer. Don't be shy. And while you craft your questions, I'm going to take a second to just say a little bit about how to access the Peer Match and Mentoring Program. We think it's rather simple, but certainly our presenters today can provide us feedback on how to improve that process. You should reach out to your Kids Count liaison or anyone of us here at the Kids Count team so that we can help guide the process. There is an actual request for proposal, which is rather simple, that we ask that you submit, and you do that in collaboration and partnership with the prospective match for you. Conversely, if you are a seasoned Kids Count person, you can serve as a mentor, and we hopefully will see many of you stepping forward to do that. If you are a newer person and you are looking to be mentor, feel free to reach out to us as well, and we can help you brainstorm who would be potentially good matches. Once the recording of the webinar and the slides are ready to circulate, we will attach a copy of our guidelines for the request for proposals, and so that you have that on hand as well. But you don't have to wait for that. You can certainly reach out to any one of us here at the Kids Count team for further information or just to talk through any ideas that you may have.
Hey, Karina, this is Frances. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So I thought it was interesting that, Beth and I did something more traditional in terms of a data peer matching, and then Amanda and Tara did communications. I'm curious if you, off the top of your head, could kind of talk about the different kinds of peer matching that has been done. And what I mean by kinds is like, it's not all about the data product. It could be executive directors, or it could be, I don't know. I'm just curious, like, how many different ways has this been tweaked to the needs of the grantees?
Absolutely. And so it's really very organic and tailored to the needs of the organizations. And as you point out, it could be a very, definitive sort of product like a data book or a data product or something along those lines. It could be mentoring just along the lines of what Amanda and Tara explained. It could also be around a specific issue. So if there's an organization that wants to get more capacity on, for example, healthcare access in their state, and they want to follow in the steps of another organization, perhaps in a neighboring state, that has been successful with that, that could also be a possibility. There are also matters around on not just the policy issues, but also on how to advance those policy issues. So we've seen proposals on how to embed a race, equity, and inclusion lens in that kind of work. We've seen partnerships around regional similarities. So it's really tailored to what the organization or the person is looking to do. One example that I seem to recall now is, for example, organizations that have a similar approach to the work. They do a lot of network and statewide coalition building. So I'm thinking about Georgia and Missouri, who are collaborating on something similar to that. I see that today we have Rhonda Mann. Hi, Rhonda, from Alabama, and Rhonda served as a mentor to someone in another organization who is sort of newer in the work. So I think, it's really very flexible in the approach. We do ask that you propose what the scope of the work will be, as well as a very simple budget, and so we'll work with you to support that connection. Does that help?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question, Tara, and that is, have you mentored in the past? Is this your first experience as a mentor?
Oh, yeah, good question. Not in this exact way, more internally to the organizations I've worked at, training younger staff in communications, but not necessarily for the exact role that I hold. So I really enjoyed it quite a bit, and would love to do more of it.
Great, and I also heard Frances sort of sharing her willingness to support other folks within the network as well. Did I hear that right, Frances?
Yeah, definitely.
Great.
I'd also throw out there that if anybody is thinking about being a peer mentor but is concerned about how it flows or time commitment or anything like that, and you want to ask me a question offline because you don't want to ask it over the webinar, you can feel free to send me a note, either through email or through Kadena.
And I'll just echo, Amanda said that, the relationship doesn't quite stop at the end of the peer-to-peer match either. I mean, I've already called on Frances for other things not actually related to the data product, and she has been kindly willing to talk to me back. So this really is a valuable connection and partnership that I hopefully continues past just the end of the match time.
So one other example that we've seen as successful in the peer-to-peer matching program is, for example, when you have two organizations which are hosted by universities. We've seen that also take place, and the chair of our steering committee for Kids Count in Delaware has engaging such a relationship. So I see Janice Barlow as a participant here as well, and so she's been in a a peer-to-peer mentoring relationship with another university within the network, because there are lots of commonalities around how those organizations do their kids count work, right? Because they are differently positioned than other kinds of organizations. So that's been successful as well.
This is Amanda again. If I also would love to talk to anyone else who is interested in a peer match and you want to know how it works from the mentee's perspective. Feel free to email me and we can talk offline or reach out through KidsNet.
That's great. Thank you for that, Amanda. So we'll wait another minute or two to see if there are any questions that have not surfaced yet. We want to make sure that everyone has a chance to raise any questions or comments.